What's the most legendary work meltdown you've seen? My PE teacher in the 9th grade got fired for this crap. She tells us to walk laps around the school for cardio day. Some kids decided to run and managed to finish 3 laps by the time the rest of us finished like 2. When we finish our second lap, we see the runners sitting, and the teacher just scream, "Get your goddamn puny butts over here." She proceeds to push the whole class onto the track in 97-degree weather and makes us sprint a mile and says that anybody who gets below 7:30 has to run it again. It was a 90-minute period. Everybody finishes, and she sits us down and calls us a multitude of bad words, and tells us that we should have finished 3 laps like they did instead of only 2, even though she told us to walk, not run, and they were running. The whole time we noticed that a girl isn't here anymore. We later found out she had to be taken away in an ambulance because she had asthma and our B.O.V.A. teacher denied her of her inhaler, so she fainted and was taken to the nurse's office immediately. I worked at Taco Bell while in high school. One of my co-workers was this guy who was really friendly, but also really strange. He was obsessed with being a straight edge kid and drew the X's on his hands, and the whole 9 yards. He had a high-pitched, but pleasant voice, and spoke in an overly polite manner. Anyway, he had put in his 2 weeks and on his last day he was working the front counter register. This lady walks up to order and he just stares at her. After a few seconds she says, "Can you take my order?" In his very calm and polite voice he says, "Oh, I am sorry ma'am, but I cannot." There was another awkward pause and she says, "Well, why not?" He responds with, "Because I am a dinosaur." He immediately started growling and roaring at her, and he walked back and forth behind the counter like a T-Rex. He did this until the GM, who was back making food, realized what was going on. On her way up to the counter he calmly clocked out and left. The GM had to apologize over and over again to the poor woman trying to order. That kid was a Taco Bell legend for several years. I wasn't there to see it, but my co-workers have talked about the cabinet incident. Last year was my first year of teaching, and I was working in a low-income inner-city school. People kept saying to me, "There's no way you could possibly be worse than the last girl we had." When I asked what they meant, I was told that a few years prior the principal had hired a first-year teacher. Apparently one day she got so overwhelmed and upset by the behavior of her class that she chucked a ream of paper out the window and then ran into the back room, shut herself in a big cabinet and cried. Her class was unsupervised for a while. Apparently none of the kids had told anyone what happened, and when the principal found her, she was curled up on the floor of the cabinet, rocking back and forth and sobbing. Clearly, she was fired soon after that. I didn't stay at that school longer than a year because the principal was the equivalent of Satan. But when I left she said to me, "Despite all the crap you were put through this year from your kids, you're the first teacher I can remember who I never saw cry at school." I'll take that as a compliment, I suppose. Writing financial software in the 80s. The systems analyst sitting at her desk near me suddenly burst into tears and wailed, "It's all so pointless. Money doesn't mean anything." This happened only a couple of days ago at my work. I didn't see it, but everyone's been talking about it. Apparently girl A came up behind girl B and slapped her on the hard hat and said, "Learn how to do your frickin' job." And girl B just frickin' lost her crap and went full UFC on girl A. Chokehold, face punches, regular choking. Girl A tried defending herself with various building parts as weapons. Both are now fired, but I don't really blame girl B. Girl A is a freaking annoying B and has been pushing everyone's nerves since she started, and I wouldn't want someone like that walking around treating co-workers that way. Someone was bound to take her down a peg eventually. Fellow pool guy threw a table into the pool we were cleaning. Apparently he got a text from his cousin that he was borrowing his N64. Reasonable TBH. If someone took my copy of Star Fox 64, even God wouldn't be able to help them. My boss was pretty tightly wrapped. One day I came into the restroom and there she was in a stall smearing her poop on the floor. I recognized her rings, and muttering. When she was finished, she cleaned up the worst of it off the floor, somehow got dressed with her icky hands, got washed, and went back to work. New hire in her first week rubs co-workers the wrong way, acting as though she's the hottest thing to hit our restaurant since food itself. When told her schedule for the next day, she argued with the manager about her availability. Threats of litigation start coming out of nowhere. She approaches two police officers who are trying to enjoy their meal completely in tears, breaking down and begging them to arrest our manager for firing her unjustly. They helped escort her out of the building. This guy in a restaurant kitchen got in a fist fight with a younger guy, punched him in the face, backed up, started shaking his face and doing the Scooby-Doo voice. He was nuts. I broke it up and took the other guy out of the kitchen to separate them and came back 10 minutes later and the crazy guy had perfectly cleaned his area, like freaking spotless, and clocked out early and never returned. Never seen or heard from him. Never picked up his last paycheck. Weirdest crap I've ever seen. When you say Scooby-Doo voice, I just imagined him giving him a quick jab and saying rah raggy while in a boxing stance. 9th grade. My English teacher had a breakdown in front of the class, kept silent but started crying whilst writing on the overhead projector her complaints about the disrespectful kids in her class. When I was an intern, we had a high priority project come through that my mentor was working on. Really fast turnaround with many late nights, crappy coffee, and good beer. Anyway, it was towards the end of the project and I was finishing bring up on the board at my bench when I heard him muttering quietly to himself. I looked up to see if he needed me and watched him absolutely pound a computer monitor with his fist, then grab it, smash it down on the floor before stomping on it screaming, "There's no goddamn DRC error, you freaking crap." He calmed down after a bit, got a beer, then requested a new monitor. That's when I learned that no matter how mad you are, screaming at Altium will not make your sleep deprivation better. First, this involves the new £5 notes. For those who don't know, they're polymer notes, and if you fold them up they tend to stay folded. It's important for the story. I served a customer, a friendly old man with white hair, who paid with a folded £5. I put it in the till. A few minutes later my boss was in the till and saw the folded note. He decided that the folds meant it had been rolled up into a tube to snort coke with. He was absolutely adamant. I said no, I just took that note from an old man. He started yelling, rolling the note up in his fingers to make a tube, shouting at me, "Look, it rolls up like this. Don't tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. Don't tell me I'm wrong." He kept shouting at me, basically waiting for me to apologize and back down, say I was wrong, but I wasn't, so I didn't. He wound up storming off, throwing things and slamming things. He's freaking insane and I should have complained, but there would be no point. Everyone knows what he's like and no one cares. During grad school, a professor in my department had a doctoral student who'd been there a few years, had passed candidacy exams and was writing up the dissertation. I still don't know what truly caused the argument, but they ended up having a shouting matching in the hallway in our academic building one day. Allegedly, students wanted to publish results and prof said no because they actually corrected a previously published theory he had first authored. Major fireworks. Student ends up switching to a new lab, refuses to let professor have the lab research notes, and wrote up his dissertation using the original data funded by the original prof under a different prof. A big deal. Again, huge drama. That professor submitted his tenure packet 1 year later. It was unanimously approved by the dept and college. The provost rejected it, because this former student went to the provost with the prof's original paper, student's data, the still unsubmitted manuscript the student had written up, everything. The uni had a rule that if you don't get tenure you have to leave. Prof never could get hired in the States after that and had to go back to his home country in the Middle East. I wish this kind of crap wasn't so common. My older sister got a nasty email from her thesis advisor because she submitted a work for publication that didn't shoehorn in a reference to one of his works. She's been a professor for years at this point. It's not like she's still depending on him to get her PhD, but he's still playing power games. I had a coworker freak out on a customer at Walmart. I used to be a cashier, and people used to tend to treat us like crap. Anyway, the lady got mad because she couldn't price match some Doritos because it was the wrong size or something. Anyway, it escalates. We can't find the CSM and a few minutes later they are screaming at each other. The cashier's parting words were, "I ain't fricking price matching your Doritos. You don't even need those Doritos with your fat butt." Needless to say, that was her last day. Had a customer try to price match great value chips for some godforsaken reason. You can't price match Walmart at Walmart, dumbass. Not too legendary, but she was screaming and throwing crap because she got caught smoking in the parking lot after causing drama non-stop the past few months. Her extremely sunburned, overweight, shirtless father burst into the store threatening management if they don't give her job back. I was in court, lawyer, and we were arguing a motion and requesting sanctions against plaintiff's attorney. The judge starts talking and dressing down the plaintiff's attorney, who, now offended, decided it would be a great idea to interrupt the judge, insult the judge, and flat out told him you were too stupid to make it in private practice and you do not know what the frick you are doing. She had been licensed for all of 3 years. She is no longer licensed. I'm in radio and one of the group of stations I worked at had an oldies station, a rock station and a pop station in the same building. We had an announcer who was really eager and wanted to learn and work and was really a great guy, but the big bosses were total jerks to him and were stuck in their old ways of doing things. They treated the announcer, we'll call him Howard, really poorly, and Howard used to come in and vent about it. He ended up getting hired at another station, but before he left, he went into the music libraries and replaced all the Led Zeppelin songs on the rock station with a gospel song from the oldies station called Trumpets of Jesus for an entire weekend. Anytime Led Zeppelin was supposed to play, Trumpets of Jesus played instead. Howard has since gone on to become program director and has won all kinds of leadership awards. Total legend. A guy I delivered pizza with had his parking spot taken by a guy he hated. He pulled out a giant monkey wrench out of his trunk and smoked him in the back of the head with it. Knocked him out. Yeah, he got arrested and fired. Well, that escalated quickly from irritated to attempted homicide. I worked in IT and one guy, who was one of the most chill guys I knew, was responsible for the deployment, updates and maintenance of a specific project that generated high revenue. One afternoon I was sitting at my desk and just heard a big crash and saw one of his 3 monitors on the floor. He stood up, shoved the next monitor over the divider onto the next section's desk, then swiped the 3rd monitor off the other side, picked up his keyboard and smashed it as hard as he could, kicked his chair away and slowly and calmly walked out the department without saying a word. He came back to work the next day as if nothing happened. Everyone knew the pressure he was under and was very good at his job, so nobody said a thing. I used to work in a kitchen in an old folks home. I had a manager named Edward who was a know-it-all piece of uninformed crap. I had a co-worker named E who had a very serious medical condition and required a certain medication at certain points of the day. Edward didn't like E or the fact that she needed to keep her medication on her person. One day E forgot her medication and begged to run home and retrieve it. Edward smugly denied her and told her to finish work. So she tried and ended up briefly collapsing. She was okay but very weak and disoriented. Edward grabbed her by her arm, escorted her to her car, handed her the keys and told her to leave. Then he left to go tell anyone that would listen that he was on drugs and he smelled booze on her. E was in the parking lot and called her mom to take her to the hospital. E was only 20 and very scared. E was discharged that night after some fluids and came back the next day upon hearing what Edward told everyone about her. She stormed into HR screaming for them to bring Edward's butt in the office immediately. As soon as he was called in, she whipped her name tag at him. I obviously lingered close by like a nosy bee. She was screaming at the top of her lungs that Edward denied her to go home to get her medication. That was on file and HR was very aware of, and how freaking dare he accuse her of being a drug addict. And if he really believed she was under the influence of something, how stupid was he to put her in a car on the company's property, leaving them liable for her damages? At this point much noise can be heard as all 3 of them are screaming full force at one another. She threatened legal action and stormed out. Well, she did take legal action for a ton of crap, including putting a clearly ill person behind the wheel. Not too long after this I also quit, and a few months later Edward was no longer employed by the kitchen but rather was working as a deli boy in the local grocery store. I don't know what happened with his lawsuit, but I hope that place and Edward got everything they deserved. Also, honorable mention to R, the maintenance man that threatened to shoot my old boss in the face for being such a dongless weasel. Guy who's hard of hearing had to blast the radio. Another guy gets sick of complaining to a dongless manager who does nothing, so he silently rips it off the cubicle and smashes it on the floor, which is not carpet, and hard, really freaking hard, like the dang thing killed his grandmother. with a look of silent but unfathomable rage on his face like Hugh Jackman coming out of the water or whatever in that Wolverine origin movie. It explodes. All the guts capacitors, coils, resistors, transistors, circuit board etc go flying. And then as people are gasping and screaming he just sighs, satisfied like he's just busted a huge nut and leaves. I pretended to be horrified but I was so happy inside. I'm imagining a clueless almost deaf guy shedding a single tear after seeing his radio smashed. He never heard anyone complain before and thought life was peachy until you hear a Helepatrol's co-worker went apacrap. I worked at Chuck E. Cheese as a teenager, and one guy found out he was being fired. He responded to this news by, naturally, slitting his wrists and wiping blood on all the walls in the kitchen. I was coming in as it was ending, but we had to call the police and everything. Bizarre scene. What the frick? We had this girl at work, and she liked to wear pants that showed a significant portion of her butt. Like if her butt crack was the Gulf Coast of the USA with Key West being her butthole, we were probably at Tallahassee. Someone complained to her manager. He didn't believe us, so we had him sit in a meeting behind her and was completely horrified. So he had a conversation with her about proper workplace clothing. Well, she never got the message, and she got a phone call from HR giving a formal warning. She flips out, storms into a meeting, calls her boss a freaking pervert, then proceeds to yell, "If you want to see my boss then see this," and moons the room, and storms off in a blaze of glory. No, we're complaining specifically because we don't want to see your butt. Actually, it was the quietest, most calm meltdown, but it screamed of anger and frustration. So I used to work in a bank's call center. A colleague of mine came in the morning. He came in late and didn't even have his coffee, and logged in. The first caller was a rude butthole who started screaming obscenities so early in the morning. My colleague, without saying a word, hung up the phone while the customer was still talking, logged off and put his headset on the table. He walked calmly and get a pen and paper, wrote his resignation and handed it over to his supervisor alongside his access card. He walked out the call center and never came back. All of this without saying a single word. It was the embodiment of the phrase "action speaks louder than words." I'm happy for him. In high school I worked at a grocery store and this kid was all peed off at another bagger and swearing in front of the customers. He said he was hoping he'd get fired. I told him he should quit before he gets fired so that it would look better on his resume in the future. A few minutes later I realized he was missing. Then suddenly he comes around the corner from the manager's office, no longer in uniform. He threw his uniform in the trash in front of the manager. Then he looked at me and said loudly, "I took your advice," then proceeded to walk across the front end, point to each associate saying Everyone was staring at me after and I said I did not tell him to do that. Best I've seen was my 7th grade math teacher. There was a girl who always talked in class. She got moved to the front at some point and she was laughing and giggling as always. After being told to be quiet about 8 times, the teacher is standing front and center in front of her, back to her and writing an example on the board. Girl has one of those plastic pencil boxes all the girls used to decorate sitting on the front corner of her desk. The teacher just cracked. In one smooth motion he spins around, yells "shut up" and smacks the box as hard as he can and it goes flying 15 feet across the room, smashes into the wall, pencils, freaking, everywhere. He swiftly walks to the door, slams it shut and we could hear pounding on the wall. One brave kid peeks out the window. Dude was banging his head against the wall. About 2 minutes later, he walks back in. Crickets, not a noise in the classroom. He begins walking around picking up every single pen and pencil, puts them all in the box, places it gently on her desk, and then just continues the example like the nothing ever happened. It was exquisite. If that doesn't describe 7th grade in a nutshell. Not saw but had. I was about 7 months pregnant and had just recently been moved to a different office. The new office had all kinds of rules no one informed me or my fellow co-workers of, and I kept getting hauled into the office to be told off for things I didn't even know I was doing wrong. Now, if it was just friendly reminders I wouldn't have had a problem, but my supervisor was this high and mighty bee that kept belittling me and trying to make me feel bad, and kept commenting on how I wasn't fit for this job. Keeping in mind I had been doing it for over 2 years at this point with the no problems. Time before the blowout she said I'd be written up next time she has to talk to me. So I'm working away, trying my damnedest to not freak up cause I really don't want to be written up and I honestly couldn't handle any more stress. Well, I get called into the office with her and our union rep and I see a notice on her desk. I lost IT. I starting yelling and crying and listing off all the horrible things she's been putting me through and how it was unfair for her to treat me like this and how half the crap I wasn't even told about. I think I actually started having a panic attack during the whole ordeal and told the union rep some of the comments she made to me over the past few months. It felt good to get it out and finally put her in her place. She was so taken aback that I stood up for myself. We'd freaked the frick out that I ended up being sent home early cause they were worried about my baby's well-being. The notice turned out to just be a list of expectations, only 6 months late, which I had to read and sign, but she left me alone after that. One day when I listened to a call, this woman had a very slow meltdown over the phone that ended in her in sobs. The caller didn't hear something she said and asked her to repeat herself. My co-worker repeated herself in a really irritated tone and then says, "Why does everyone want me to be mean today?" to the caller. The girl on the other line is obviously confused and asked her if she was having a bad day and if she needed to speak to someone else. She then says no and that she will be the one helping her. It gets worse. She bombs this call, like totally does not do her job correctly and makes this painfully obvious to the point where the caller says that she will help her figure this out together and to not cry anymore. This was a help desk type job for other employees. Well, they don't and she ends up crying and you can hear her snap at someone else in the office, which obviously has the caller insanely concerned. My co-worker goes on a rant about how people are hateful and that she hates this job and that it's too hard for her to do. It wasn't really easy for everyone and tells the caller she's going to be transferred. We had to call back and issue the caller an apology. She responded by asking if my co-worker was going to be okay. We said yes, but no, she wasn't. The office manager ended up having to fire her for another call where she was complaining and abusing the caller. Before she was fired, she was told she could use her benefits to speak to a counselor because she kept having outbursts at work and everyone was getting worried about her. She said this wasn't the first time she heard that and didn't know why people kept saying it. I still think about her. This was 2 years ago and wonder if she ever got help. I worked in fast food for years, and while it might not be the most intense thing, this kid who worked 60+ hours a week at 17 came into work one day with a completely shaved head because it was more efficient to maintain and it helped him work more often. I have never seen someone so young be so dead inside and with that shiny of a head. Just about a month ago now, 2 of the kitchen guys at the restaurant that I bartend at got in an incredibly heated argument over eating butt. One was very for tongue punching the old fart box and the other was very against it. Every time I went back to grab food, they were both getting angrier and angrier. It got to the point of them screaming at each other and pans being thrown before finally they seemed to calm down. About 20 minutes later, I go to check on food and only the dishwasher was in the kitchen and no food was even being cooked and a stream of orders was still coming out of the printer. Apparently the argument started back up, and to solve it once and for all, they went to the parking lot and beat the living crap out of each other. They came back in bruised and quite bloodied and tried to go back to cooking food like nothing happened. 5 minutes later, the owner stormed in with 2 guys that weren't working to cover the rest of the shift and fired both of them as they tried to defend their arguments over eating butt to the owner while the entire staff tried to stifle our laughter. I was hoping they went out back to settle it by trying out both ways on each other. I once worked with a guy on salary whose availability was clearly abused, who used to joke that he just wouldn't come in tomorrow. Then one day he didn't come in. In fact, no one could figure out where he was. Turned out he moved states and got a new job and just didn't bother telling his boss until he was already long gone. Good on him. It was a call center and probably 80 people were working at the time. All of our cubicles are on the same floor. She sends an email to our boss and CCs the entire office. Something along the lines of "frick this place, frick the boss, frick the break room, basically frick everything and your family." Then the last line, "Oh yeah, I left my badge on my desk." When I was in college, I worked at an animal hospital. One week, the boss owner was on vacation and several co-workers joked about having a liquid lunch together one day. One girl thought it was such a good idea that she brought a bottle of vodka back to work from her break. She tried to get us all to drink together. While on the clock, but no one else participated. So she was butthurt and drank herself into oblivion. She made an absolute fool of herself. During all this, she hid one person's wallet, asked me on a date, cursed 2 people out, spun herself around in circles on the floor like a drunk break dancer, and puked all over the only employee bathroom and passed out. The office manager helped her to the couch to sleep it off. As most folks were leaving for the day, she woke up and snuck out to her car and flew out of the parking lot, almost hitting a coworker. She floundered down the road and eventually ran over a large curb, which messed her small car up, and she left it and walked to her friend's house. Yeah, she got canned the second the boss got back, and even acted surprised about it. Go figure. This particular staffer has been on the edge regarding her being employed for about a year. The office manager finally decided to let her go after the 5th time she brought all 5 kids, under 10, all, to work, and they destroyed our Keurig. It is on film. The eldest picked it up and slammed it on the floor repeatedly. Her ranting featured extremely loud swearing, calling damnation on the manager, and an itemized list of why we all could go to heck. Rubber bands. They're everywhere. 1, 2, 3. Apparently, someone in my office was putting rubber bands all over the place, like around things where it shouldn't be. It annoyed this one girl, and she started accusing people on who did it. Ended up walking through the area the rubber bands were in, yelling about how they were everywhere. Got a work email about how we shouldn't be using work supplies on things other than what they were meant for. TLDR, we had a rubber bandit. First job working as a host at a local restaurant. Our short stalky chef was being particularly pestered by our 15-year-old dishwasher boy. Now this dishwasher boy was annoying on any given day, non-stop talking, tons of gossiping, whining, and bragging pretty much from the start to end of his shifts. I'm standing at the host station at the tail end of the evening rush when out of nowhere I hear our chef yell, through the walls of the kitchen mind you, "That's IT, you little frick," followed by the high-pitched wail of the dishwasher boy. I only have time to jerk my head towards the racket when the dishwasher boy comes sprinting out of the kitchen, still screaming, "Pass me, pass customers," and out the door of the restaurant. Seriously, him shrieking as he ran by was the only time I've had the chance to experience the Doppler effect without a vehicle passing by. Seconds later the chef bursts out of the kitchen and follows him out of the restaurant, hot on his heels. What incited the altercation was that the dishwasher boy was being his usual aggravating self, and chef, having enough of his crap, told him to knock it off. Dishwasher boy then decided the appropriate thing to do would be to overhand throw a spoiled spoon at chef while he was working at his station. Spoon caught him square in the face, and that was that. So now every customer in the restaurant and I are staring in awe into the parking lot as chef closes the distance on dishwasher boy. Dishwasher boy appears to turn and say something to chef in frantic defense for himself. Whatever he is trying to say is cut short as chef grabs his torso with both hands, literally hoists him up above his head, takes 2 large steps towards the open steel dumpster, and hurls the dishwasher boy right into it. Chef walks back in and gets back to work without saying a word. Dishwasher boy climbs out and comes back in, crying, and gets back to work. Customers ask me da fuck just happened. Received a lot of customer complaints that night. I went to a private high school. The teachers having 12 to 14 hours days plus their grading wasn't at all weird. One of my teachers ended up completely snapping one day in the middle of the school year. He went on a full-on rant at one of his classes because they wouldn't stop talking. He was so angry the entire class of about 30 students was being yelled at full volume for 45 minutes of their class time because of this, and left them all in complete shock. For the first 20 minutes of my class period he sat there, quietly, without addressing the class. I've never seen a group of 20 teenagers so silent in my life, and I'm sure I'll never see it again. There have been many meltdowns where I work between the same 2 people, their father and son, and they don't see eye to eye. The son is the president of the company, but the father and mother own majority stock. The son is an alcoholic with a violent temper, though he's okay when he isn't drunk. And the father is 84 and suffers from Alzheimer's but is still somewhat there. They get into shouting matches over family drama at work. People have ended up being arrested and fired multiple times due to unrelated reasons, but most of the time it just adds fuel to the fire because someone within the family is the one who's being arrested or fired. I've watched the son punch holes in the walls and storm out of the building, keys in hand, and speed off down the road. The father goes back to what he's forgotten he's already done. On average, this happens once or twice a week. Sounds like Orange County choppers. My 8th grade teacher got mad at a kid for taking too long sharpening a pencil because the sharpener was broken. She storms over, grabs the pencil, and starts sharpening, but she still can't get it to work. So, she huffs over to the student pencil drawer, rips it open and yanks the drawer so hard it comes flying out. Inside, a pencil sharpener cracked, so a classmate and I tried to clean it up. Then she yelled at us and told us to sit down. Mrs. Crazy then assigns the class a 4-paragraph essay instead of a Socratic seminar, because we couldn't handle mature topics, which is how she interpreted a few nervous laughs. The period after, she threw a chair at a student. This is the teacher that has broken down in class several times before and has a tendency to throw writing utensils and smartboard markers. Not at work, but in 7th grade, one girl ripped the pencil sharpener off the wall and threw it at the whiteboard, denting it. Then she threw a chair at our teacher and the principal had to come remove her from the classroom. Some guy next to me just screamed out Rick, so that's the top currently. My ex-co-worker. We work in an office and this one day she must have just been in a bad mood. We were due to have a staff meeting and she was supposed to arrange it all, hand out agendas, prepare the conference room, lock up etc. It was about 10:05 and the meeting was at 10. My boss, who was also in a bad mood, came down to reception and asked what the heck was going on. She just flipped out on him. She threw a bunch of paperwork at him and just started shouting about how she's fed up of him and is quitting. She then storms out of the office. My boss just stood there, then turned around and went back to his office. The rest of the staff made our way to the conference room for this meeting and as we were sat there, it was really intense and awkward and deathly silent. We were all just looking at our boss waiting for him to react. Surprisingly he stayed super calm. Next thing we know, we hear someone unlock the front door and come in. We assumed it was this lady. We then start to hear furious typing. I mean, she must have been slamming her fingers on the keyboard because we could all hear it from upstairs. So we all just sat there listening to this noise, still deathly silent. Eventually it stopped and this lady storms up the stairs and throws her quitting notice at my boss and leaves again. My boss just looks at it calmly, then finally addresses the rest of us and just said that he will not tolerate being spoken to the way she spoke to him and that was pretty much it. We carried on the day as normal. Still makes me laugh to think about it. That was a good day. Dang Mr. Boss handled that like a champ. Guy got fired at my work for ordering high cost items and saying they were for clients. They were purchased using state funds and he would just take the items home. Well, he memorized the phone number receptionists use to page people. It's an actual phone number so anyone is able to call it and it'll go through the speakers. So this guy called it and basically said all of these obscenities about people. It was like that scene in The Office where Michael roasts people for making fun of him. But this guy was very NSW. It was kinda funny though. The best part was nobody could do anything about it because he was calling from an outside line and wasn't even in the office. This Irish bloke I used to work with, say, Sean, was on a works meal out at a Chinese buffet place and was fairly drunk. Someone made a slight crack at him, not even sure what it was, but he claimed it was to do with him being Irish. Some sort of pee-take. He left it for about 5 minutes but then just suddenly interrupted him talking to others saying you dirty freaking C. The guy looks bemused and he just repeats you're a dirty freaking C, aren't you, getting more and more simmering with rage, pointing at his chest. The guy is basically like WTF and then all of a sudden, he throws the wildest drunkest haymaker knocking the guy right into a table full of Chinese food which collapses making a pretty impressive noise and mess. The guy is on the floor freaking covered in shiny sauce and Sean picks up a pint glass and just tips it all over him. He finally seemed to calm down and then just shrugs as if to say what can you do, says well, he is a dirty freaking C, that fella, and then strolls out casual as you like. I studied on a master's degree in finance which was known for being extremely high pressure and stressful, and both had my own non-entertaining break down as well as saw others. I'd seen things like a girl break down in tears during a lecture because of the sheer number of assignments we already had when another got assigned, a guy break his pen and just leave the lecture, and several screaming fights among students apparently over group projects. The best was actually pretty calm, though. We had some guy get invited in to talk about some financial security, I forget the name, and have totally left finance with no intentions to return, which effectively allowed you to profit if another person defaulted on their mortgage. About 10 minutes into the talk, this one student who everyone respected basically stood up and spent about 5 minutes completely talking this guy and his career into the ground. The guy kept looking around desperately and looked sheepish as crap, and after that, continued with his talk with the most awkward atmosphere with obvious disrespect just emanating from the students. He completely lost any authority in that room. Every question he got after was basically a snide, and people were openly laughing and booing at him. I think it was in part the unethical nature of the security peeing off a bunch of students who grew up with a recession, as well as him becoming the focus of everyone's collective stress. I'm a bagger at my local grocery store. First job, and we had just hired a new guy about 2 weeks earlier. Anyways, this guy gets his 15-minute break and comes back on time as normal. Only one problem, he is now high out of his mind. Spends about 30 minutes unbagging groceries before management notices and pulls him aside to talk to him about it. Also note, this guy hasn't spoken anything but gibberish for this time, but he freaks out, starts yelling in his gibberish and throwing cans all around. Yep, that's it. You've been spotted by the doggo of studying. Like this video for good grades for the next 2 years. Like and subscribe, you magnificent person.